Love in different sorts is found along the lines in all religions. However, it never played the same role as logics, being a cornerstone of different knowledges and sciences of its own. What is love? What role did it play before Islam? And how did it evolve into becoming a science of its own and thus the essence of religion, revolutionizing the relationship between God and human? If you look at the history of Christianity, during the first 400 years, the Christians were very harassed, oppressed, followed by the governments. In order to survive, they fled the cities and went into far-fetched places outside cities, places in nature, sometimes seeking asylum in the woods or in the caves. And this became the foundation of what later became known as the monasteries. And they fled because of fear, basically because they were being killed or harassed or assaulted. This fear in Arabic is called rohba. Rohba was the fear of dying, basically. Later in the 4th century, when Constantine I became the Roman emperor, he allowed Christianity, converting to Christianity in himself and paving the way for Christianity to become the state religion. And from there on, Christianity and Christians were free to live in society. However, since they had been living, some of them had been living in these caves or in these monasteries away from society, these lived on. And from this point on, Rohba, the fear, transformed from fear of your life to fear of God. The Quran itself mentions this in Surah Hadid. ثم وقفينا على آثارهم برسلنا وقفينا بعيسى بن مريم وآتيناه الإنجيل وجعلنا في قلوب الذين اتبعوه رأفة ورحمة ورهبانية ابتدعوها ما كتبنا عليهم إلا ابتغاء رضوان الله فما رأوها حق رعايتها فآتيناها الذين آمنوا منهم أجرهم وكثير منهم فاسقون. Then we sent following their footsteps our messengers and followed them with Jesus, the son of Mary, and gave him the gospel. And we placed in the hearts of those who followed him compassion and mercy, a monasticism, which they innovated. We did not preach it for them except that they did so seeking the approval of God, but they did not observe it with due observance. So we gave the ones who believed among them their reward, but many of them are definitely disobedient. Now, this verse confirms the existence of monasteries. And what is also interesting is that the Arabic word used for it is rohbaniya. So as you can see in the Arabic word itself, it shows that fear is a central stone in the monastery. Now, where did this fear come from? I mean, so it was a fear for your life, but it turned into a fear of God. And the reason for this might be from the old Greeks, because among the old Greek philosophers, such as Plato or Aristotle, the view on religion, on ethics, on way of behavior, on life view and world view were rather rigid. It wasn't very soft. It was, so to say, love had no real place. It was more of a feeling or something, and the reason could be their view on God, that God was something completely different from us. It was a very high hierarchy. It's like something beyond your grasp, beyond you. It's far above you, and you're in this world, and what matters is how you perceive it and how you act upon it. So everything that they defined, their school of thought, for example, they had a school of thought in morals, in akhlaq, in ethics, describing the four forces that Islamic scholars later adopted as well. The conception that you have four faculties or four powers. You have the intellect, you have the anger, the desires, and the imagination. And when these are in balance, you are the perfect man that they call the philosopher. But when you divert from them, different moral diseases occur. For example, the power or the faculty of anger. If you think grades from 0 to 100, in the middle you have perfect balance, and in this scenario you are a brave person. However, the more you go to the right, the more excessive anger you have, the more you become a tyrant. While the less anger you have, the more you go towards the left, you become a coward. Now, if all four of these faculties are in perfect balance, a new power occurs within you, and that is justice, the way that Plato defines it. So you have this institutionalized way of thinking regarding morals, philosophy, ethics, logics, mathematics, etc. Now, when Jesus came to the Jewish society, the religion had become very focused on the outward, the rules, the laws, the fear of God was very dominant. So Jesus came with the inward of religion, speaking very much about the essence, the love, the compassion, the forgiveness. But it wasn't really institutionalized. It wasn't like a science. It was more like another way of thinking, like think outside the box. Now Jesus was harassed and pursued and chased away, and so were the Christians following him. And fear, as in fear of your life, were dominant among the Christians as they lived in secrecy and trying to preserve their faith in Jesus Christ. And this continued until Constantine. Now, among the Arabs, in the era of ignorance before Islam, love was more of a sensual thing. The word ishq was filled in the music, commonly used in the music. The music was very sensual, enticing desires. So when the Quran was revealed, the word ishq for love was never used. Rather, the word hub, and in some occurrences would, was used instead. Now the word hub is frequently used in the hadiths, in the sayings from scholars, in some Quran verses, but the word ishq is not used. From the sayings of the 4 Imams of the Sunni school of thought and the 12 Imams from the Shia school of thought, you scarcely find the word ishq. Hub is used instead to not confuse and associate the love of God with this sensual, bodily love. And even what is also interesting is in the history of music, where basically there has been a total ban on music from all scholars within Shia or Sunni until modern times, where scholars have categorized permissible and forbidden music. The reason could be that they were afraid that this limit, the red line, will disappear, so people will cross it and go back to the pre-Islamic times where all of the music was some sort of sensual, fleeing experience from reality, creating negligence and ghafla from God, which will have a negative spiritual effect. When Islam came after the demise of the Prophet, when the Islamic society and the Caliphate slowly started to divert from the original spiritual revival that the Prophet had came with, and everything started to become more glamorous and more worldly, the Islamic mystics, the Orafa, started to migrate from the Islamic society for the same reason as the early Christians. They moved to far areas of the Islamic world, to villages in the outskirts of the cities, in places where there were less ordinary people all indulged in buying and selling and having nice clothes and businessmen and these type of things that were going on in society. They move from fear that their belief and their faith and their inside and their heart and their soul will become dirty from worldliness. So they moved away, and this is how the Islamic spirituality and the mystical tradition of Islam spread to areas in Iran, to parts of Europe and Spain, such as Andalusia, or to North Africa, etc. And in these places you will find mystical traditions, Sufi tariqas, etc. So their fear was similar to the early Christians in that they had the rohba, this fear of God, and the fear that their religion and faith will be corrupted. And since the Islamic philosophical tradition emerged from the work of the Greek philosophers, where they translated it and expanded and dived deeper into these ideas of the philosophers. And since these Greek philosophers had very much focus on slave-lord relationship with God, and they had schools of thought with akhlaq and ethics and morals, this resulted in the early Islamic tradition of spirituality having a lot of zuhd, asceticism, while love was just a bystander. The first generation of Islamic mystics, such as Ibrahim Adham, Fudayl ibn Ayyaz, these type of persons, Ma'ruf Karhi, what they did, for example, Ibrahim al-Adham, he has the story similar to Buddha, where he lives in a very wealthy place in a palace, and then he denounces everything and lives as a ascet. Or you have Ma'ruf Karhi, who does the same, who gives up all of his properties and money and everything he has. Or Fudayl ibn Ayyaz, who was a thief in the beginning, and then he converted to Islam, and then he gave back all that he had. So this is a very strong tradition of asceticism, of giving up everything. Then you have the second generation in the 9th century, such as Junayd al-Baghdadi, who was a faqih. He was a scholar, like in the jurisprudence of Islam. He's actually called a sober arif, a sober mystic, because he doesn't have much sayings and utterances about love at all. Even though you have mystics during this time, such as Abu Yazid Bastami and Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, this wondrous woman, spiritual woman, they have sayings about love, but it's more like a way of thinking. It's not a madrasa, it's not a way of life. And this goes on all the way until the 11th century, where giants such as Imam Ghazali came along, and he made a madrasa, and he made a school out of asceticism. And if you look at his works, how he describes a spiritual person, a salik, a wayfarer, how he should live. For example, he should eat once every 3 days or 2 days, or at most once every day. He shouldn't own much, he should live simply. And there were always references to the Sahaba, to the companions, and the simplicity in how they were living. Now, one parenthesis here is that, yes, the society during the time of the Prophet was a poor society. It was the beginning of the emergence of Islam. The Muslims had migrated from Mecca to Medina. Of course, when you start a new society, it will take time to build up an economic standard. So you had the inheritance from the Greeks in their view on God and the world, and the living example of the first generation of the Muslims. So until this point in history, like 5 generations of Islamic mystics, Irfan and mysticism and Sufism and Tasawwuf was mostly focused on Zuhd and Ubudiyya. It was focused on asceticism and on worship in a slave-master relationship with God. Hub and love was not a school. It had no central role. It had no foundation in spirituality. It was like the flowers in the window. But then came the 13th century, and the greatest mystic of all times, Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, the Shaykh al-Akbar, and he revolutionized completely the relationship between man and God, and with that, love entered as the true foundation of Islamic spirituality. أدين بدين الحب أني توجهت ركائبه فالحب ديني وإيماني. I follow the religion of love. Wherever the camels of love take me, that is my religion and faith. Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, the 11th ghazal of his Tarjuman al-Ashwaq. What Ibn Arabi did was, and it was a lot of things that he completely revolutionized, but one of the things was that he took وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, God is with you wherever you are, this ma'iyat, this being with God, and changed the meaning of it completely, where he introduced likeliness between us and God, meaning that man is like God. This dhuhur and madhar, this that there is one dhuhur, one manifestation, and everything is a manifestation and expression of the divine. The wahdat al-wujud, that there is only one existence, and everything are different forms of existence. So God is existence, and everything is existent is a type of existence. This is where man became similar to God, like God, a reflection of God, an expression of God, a manifestation of God. He laid a hard philosophical groundwork for it, and he built up the school of thought circulating around love. Of course, this shocked the Islamic world, and both scholars of the outward sciences and mystics made takfir of him, meaning that they considered him to be a heretic who had deviated from the path of Islam. And Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi then took these philosophical doctrines of Ibn Arabi and he blew poetry into this body, making love cover all of the aspects of the Islamic religion, from even the punishments, from even death penalty, to the hell and the Jahannam, which he describes as a mosque for the infidels where they worship and call upon God. From this point on, love was the foundation of Islamic spirituality, and you could truly say that Islamic spirituality is about love. And this is where the word ishq truly emerged and found its true meaning. Now, what does ishq mean? The word itself is a most powerful word, which describes intense love. The Quran uses the milder word hub to describe this feeling. Ashaddu hubban lillah. Those who believe are strong in their love, or stronger in their love for Allah. The scholar Ustad Fatiminia decided to explore the term ishq in various hadiths, and in those days where computers were non-existent, he had to go through all of the ahadith collections hand by hand. And when he did that, he found that the word ishq occurs merely 4 or 5 times in both a negative context or a positive context. So it was a neutral word. It was not used in Islamic original sources. Lexicographically, ishq originates from ashaqa. When grass loses its color and turns yellow, it is called ashaqa. Therefore, ishq, when it overtakes a human, it makes him completely lose his color and shape. Like the straw of grass turning yellow in its longing for water, he too passes on to another phase, longing for his beloved. This is what Rumi means when he says بشنو از این نی چون شکایت میکند از جدایی ها حکایت میکند. Listen to the reed how it longs for its origin, which we have another video, the spiritual roots of loneliness, which you can click on and listen to. Anyhow, spirituality, ishq, is an extension of aql. Love is an extension of reasoning. When aql reaches its limit, ishq begins. Many poets and mystics describes ishq as something beyond aql, thus not in conflict with reason, but an extension of it and beyond. The basis of ishq is therefore aql, and when reason crosses over to love, there is nuzul, the descent of blessings in form of makashafat, spiritual disclosures and revelations, and shuhud, spiritual visions and attestation. Rumi has a nice story of describing this when he describes Majnun in the love story of Majnun and Layla. When Majnun once he's sitting on a she-camel riding towards the city of Layla, and in the desert on the way, when he's sitting on the camel, each time that he is thinking about Layla, drowned in his longings, he loses hands on the reins of the she-camel. Now the she-camel has a baby camel back in the city. So when Majnun loses the grip of the reins, she turns around and starts going back to the city. Now Majnun comes to his senses, grabs hold of the reins and steers the she-camel back towards the destination of Layla. But then he starts thinking about Layla again and loses control of his senses. Again the she-camel turns around, and this goes on back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until Majnun throws himself down on the desert and says, from now on the she-camel cannot take me any further. From now on the attraction of Layla will pull me forth. And he shapes himself into a ball and starts rolling around, whirling forth by the pure love attraction from Layla. Now in this story, Rumi likens aql and reason to the she-camel that thinks about what it must do and what it must not do, the obligations, the duties, and so it was to go back to the city, go back to its responsibilities, go back to taking care of everything. While ishq, while this higher level of man wants to drive him forth towards the origin, towards the ma'shuq, towards the beloved. But this story, the reason can only take you this much and not any further. You want to go longer than that, and this is where the attraction of the beloved will pull you forth. So love in the spiritual tradition of Islam is built upon reason. It's not separate from reason. You don't act against reason, rather you do that which reasons they're not. And this is why you are willing to give up your life, give up your wealth, give up everything you have just for the sake of your beloved. Let's end this episode by the following quote from Muhyiddin ibn Arabi. Although there are many lovers, or rather everyone in existence is a lover, no one knows the object to which his love attaches. People are veiled by the existent thing within which their beloved is found. They imagine that the existent thing is their beloved, but in reality, it is their beloved only indirectly.